Civilization is the making of civil persons. John Ruskin. The current 21st century is a time of prosperity for a post-industrial civilization that was invented and developed by the US scientific community in the 50s and 60s. It is believed that the spread of creative intellectual work, a qualitative increase in the volume of scientific knowledge and information, the development of communications, science, education and culture constitutes the basis of post-industrial civilization. They contribute to the survival of other civilizations from the youngest to the oldest in modern society, because everyone lives in the same information space. And what does this society know about the nomadic civilization that originated on the Kazakh land 6,000 years ago? US political scientist Samuel Huntington divides the world into 8 major civilizations. These include Western, Latin American, Slavic Orthodox, Islamic, Confucian, Hindu, Japanese, and possibly African civilization. Now please pay attention to the following information. The notion of the Kazakh civilization is interpreted officially in the modern domestic cultural studies as the intersection of 3 civilizations: Slavic Orthodox, Islamic, and Confucian. Then, where is the nomadic culture that originated in the first millennium BC? It should be understood that the way of life, customs, and culture of the Kazakh people is the heritage of those tribes who, having tamed the horse, began the great migration between Altai and Datarau, Sari Arka, and Dalatau. But how and why have this migration began and taken place? Scientists have different opinions on this issue. Some say sedentary livestock keeping developed gradually with the growing number of livestock. As the number of livestock increased, it became necessary to expand the pastures. We began a nomadic life when caring for the animals that we were breeding. There is even a saying, first think about the field before you start grazing livestock. Therefore, the Kazakhs moved to autumn pastures in the fall, in winter to winter pastures, and in summer to summer pastures. During this process, the worldview, culture, language, and traditions and spirituality of the ancient Kazakh people have been formed. You have witnessed the movement from summer pasture Jailao to winter pasture. This is not easy work. I hope you understand what a real fast horse should be. It must be strong, patient, and enduring. On a long journey, it should produce a smooth ride so that you feel comfortable. Vast Kazakh steppes stretch toward a boundless horizon. The path from Jailao to the winter pasture is too long. A person gets tired when overcoming long distances. That is why his horse should be comfortable to ride. Kazakh Karabair horses have endured everything. You saw how our black horse steadfastly endured all the tests. You have passed through all stages, from start to finish. This is also heroism.
Өшкенде жылқайдаймын ала менен алып барушы едім оу салау менен әридашым
It is known that the Industrial Revolution of the 21st century, the beginning of the information era, made the nomadic peoples abandon their traditional economy and way of life. But they are the main essence of the Kazakh people, their wealth, which we must study. In the early Iron Age, the use of horses, stirrups, bridles, and saddles by humans laid the foundation for nomadic livestock. We talked about the use of horses by Kazakhs in previous episodes. In general, horses contributed to the development of the steppe civilization and led to the development of nomadic agriculture. That is why nomads and horses are close. The nomadic community was even called the Mounted Dynasty. Let us consider, on the basis of historical examples, what advantages the culture of nomads had. All the great warriors in the history of Kazakhstan rode only the strongest and best carabineers. Several centuries ago, our ancestors were very tall and of strong athletic build. Not every stallion could carry a heavy warrior. It is impossible to imagine the life of a Kazakh without a horse. The role of the horse was very important in everyday life, both in terms of migration and in terms of frequent wars. Other tribes who have been living on the territory of modern Kazakhstan, such as the Sakas, Huns, Wusuns, Sarmatians, and then the medieval Turks, blended for various reasons with the ancient and medieval civilizations of Eurasia. Thus, the nomads assimilated their cultural patterns and adopted the best cultural achievements of other peoples. The nomads acted as a driving force, a link between different cultures. The vast steppes of Eurasia are considered the most ancient land of nomadism. If we delve into history, then the period of the Saka, Han, Turkic Khanates, then the Middle Ages, followed by the Kazakh Khanate, became the foundation for the formation of modern independent Kazakhstan. Now let's look at the history of the formation of this society, the nomadic civilization. Horses were first domesticated in our country.
Tayfalardan kuruladı, tayfalar urulardan kuruladı. Осы жүйе 19 ғасырға дейін өміршең болды.
The nomads themselves are a whole people. What was the structure of this people? Nomads consisted of tribes, and those in turn consisted of clans. The system was viable until the 19th century. The mechanism for managing people among the nomads turned out to be very effective. From a social point of view, the nomads, that is Kazakhs, had a court of bees, judges. The word of the bee was the law for everyone. A person could not just take and declare himself the bee, he was chosen by people. Thus, a strong social consciousness of people was manifested. That is, a nomadic society could be viewed as a single mechanism or organism. Now, unfortunately, we have lost it.
Ал қазір сол бар ма бізде? Біз жоғалту үстіндеміз.
According to scientific studies, a horse eats 5 to 6 kilograms of grass per day. This requires an area of about 10-14 square meters. Considering that horses do not graze in one place respectively, more territory is necessary. Now think about how much land you need to allocate for pasture. Therefore, the distance between Kistau and Jailao, winter and summer pastures, was at least 100 kilometers. So what was the nomadic life like once in Kazakhstan? Shepherds spent winter and autumn in the Caspian lowland, on the Ustyurt Plateau, in Turgay, Bet-Pagdala and Balkhash steppes, on the territory of Saryarka, Mughal and Mangistau. As for the summer pastures, they were located on the mountain slopes of Altai, Tarbagatai, Jetisu, and Ile Alatau. Full nomadic cattle breeding in these regions had been taking place during all 4 seasons.
Taulardan жылжып аққан бұлақтайсың ой қарағай, шауып өткен маралдай, жастық өтіп барады. басынан талай ердің аттай тебіп сым жалған қайда барып тұрақтайсың ой қарағай шауып өткім аралдай жастық өтіп барадай.
The very process of migration was systematic, both among the Kazakhs and among the Turks in general. People followed the principle according to which it was impossible to graze livestock on foreign territory. Now let's take a closer look at the migration process itself. On flat territories, Kazakhs could migrate over distances of up to 1,000 kilometers. This could be the distance between wintering and Jailao. In mountainous areas, this distance could be from 100 to 500 kilometers. On summer pastures, nomads usually climbed the mountains, but for wintering they chose mostly flat land. In fact, all this was done for the comfortable grazing of the animals. That was the main thing. Of course, seeing a similar process from the outside, other peoples began to call us nomads. The most important period in animal husbandry is winter. In areas with heavy snowfalls, a lot of food is usually prepared for livestock. Animals don't graze for long. For wintering, the Kazakhs usually chose a place with mild weather conditions. The main goal was to survive until spring without suffering losses. During that period, lavish celebrations were almost not held because people had to work hard. In addition, in order to save feed, the animals were sent to pasture where there was mild winter. The horses were led first. The next important period for a breeder who had survived winter begins in spring when it is time for calving. The main goal for each family was to save and breed the offspring of each animal. This period was no longer as snowy as winter with its raging snowstorms, but the land was not yet covered with grass and food supplies were already running out. Therefore, the Kazakhs tried to calculate the possible risks in advance. They studied the area where they would live beforehand. They already knew in which region in the spring the green grass sprouts from under the snow earlier. That is why in some gorges in summer and autumn herds weren't grazed at all. Then in spring, people let out cattle with newborn offspring in order to somehow make it until the summer. November and December, 2 months, are like brothers. Early winter, they come one after another. No need to run headlong for the wintering. The cattle will eat all the grass. I will wait while at the autumn pasture. Summer is the time when nomadic animal husbandry is flourishing and all livestock breeders are happy. They live in mountainous areas with sufficient water, abundant green grass, while the animals do not graze under the blazing sun. Livestock are already trained to live in certain areas each year. That is, animals know where to graze, where to drink water, where to find shade to rest. The main thing is that shepherds do not need to watch their livestock from morning to night. That is why livestock breeders who had survived the difficult period of winter and spring have a great time, hold festivities, invite each other to weddings. When the sun goes down and the first snow falls on the tops of the mountains, the shepherds go to the autumn pastures to the foothills. Long-distance migration begins at this stage. And by the way, the time to pay off all debts begins. By this time, the cattle in the pastures are already well fed and increased livestock can be sold. The basis of our culture is education. Knowledge is transmitted through language. The language of educated people will always be rich. Kalel Dusmukameduli.
Құрметті көрермен, сіздерге бір қызық дерек айтайын.
Dear viewers, you should know about one interesting fact. The study of child psychology firmly entered the global science in the 19th century. But the most interesting thing is that the Kazakhs understood this issue since their ancestors' time. How, you might ask? For example, a weak child was forced to graze horses. Horses are very expressive by nature and fast. You need to keep up with them everywhere. Thus the child learned to make decisions quickly, learned to think and reflect. But a fidget was forced to graze sheep since they are very slow animals. Thus the child became calm. So children were brought up in Kazakh families following the experience of our ancestors. Kobalandi Batir was a very strong and brave man. There is a story when his beautiful wife Kortka chose for him Karabayir horse called Tayburil. God endowed her with the ability to distinguish a purebred from a simple horse. Once Kobalandi and Kortka rode past the herd of horses and Kortka noticed a mare. She immediately told Kobalandi that this mare would give birth to a stallion who would serve him faithfully. Kobalandi said that it would not be difficult to take the mare out of the herd since the herd belonged to his uncle. Kortka took care of the animal for several months and then Tayburil was born. For 6 long years, Kortka took care of Tayburil, so it grew. Suddenly a war broke out. Kobalandi wanted to go to fight with his horse Tayburil, but Kortka said that it was necessary to wait another 40 days. The horse was not ready yet. But Kobalandi disobeyed her and rode his Tayburil horse to the war. Of course, Kobalandi defeated the enemies and threw them back. But in the last decisive battle, the horse stumbled and fell. Then Kobalandi realized that his wife was right and the horse was not completely ready. Here is such a wonderful story about our warriors and their comrade in arms, faithful horses. According to Persian historian Ibn Ruzbek Khan, nomadic peoples quickly mastered the processing of wood, the manufacture of yurts and carts. According to medieval sources, they also created their own cart, arba. The nomads improved the construction of their yurts. They skillfully made shiny rock, folding lattice walls and poles that formed the dome. The walls of the dwelling were covered with felt and sheepskin. The yurts were very beautiful and could accommodate up to 20 people during the festivities. Historical data indicate that the Kazakhs began to develop crafts in ancient times.
Көшпелі далада өзіміздің жеке мынау эстетикаға байланысты музыка өнерінің қалыптасуы. Мәселен, бұны біздің Әл-Фараби бағының музыканың ұлы кітабы деген ұлы кітабында өте жақсы сурет.
Our ancestor Al-Farabi in his great book of music illustrated well the formation of Kazakh musical art in the nomadic steppe. In addition, the formation of food intake and the food culture can be mentioned. A yurt was created. It is commonly known that yurts were first used in our steppe. They served perfectly as the dwelling of nomads. Since the Kazakhs led a nomadic life, they had to constantly search for clean water and tall grass. At the same time, nomadic tribes then always fought. The formation of the Kazakh nation took place. And in this respect, the role of the yurt is invaluable. A Kazakh man was a nomad, not because he was ignorant and lacked knowledge. The natural environment forced him to be a nomad. Sergei Shvetsov. Our wise people lived in a complete harmony with nature. For example, analyzing the behavior of animals and birds, they could predict certain natural phenomena, forecast the weather. If the sheep constantly returned from the pasture with pieces of grass in their mouth, this meant that next year there could be zhut, mass cattle deaths. If in winter a camel constantly licks its lips and horses snort and neigh, then spring will come early. If a ram constantly rubs its chest with its hooves, it means that a large amount of snow will fall out in winter. If the sheep are gritting their teeth, then a storm is about to rise. If the sheep willingly go to the corral, then the next year will be favorable and fruitful. The nomadic culture changed the life of the Kazakhs as well as their consciousness, customs, and formed a spiritual culture. For example, when a child was born to the Kazakh family, they asked, "Is he a shepherd or a groom?" This meant who was born, a boy or a girl. If a shepherd, then a boy was born who will help his father with the household, that is, he will graze the cattle. If a groom, then it meant that a girl was born. Why? Since ancient times, a bride costed 9 mares. In some regions, instead of the question, "Do you have a son?" it was common to say, "Do you have someone to tie your horse?" It meant that if the head of the family came home, the children ran out and tied his horse, and the man himself entered the home. When a boy was born to a family, the cut-off umbilical cord was tied to the horse's mane. Thus, they wished a child wealth to have as many horses as possible. When the Kazakhs had a migration period, it was a great holiday for them. Kazakhs migrated over very long distances and, of course, across their territory. Kazakhs have always had casual and formal wear. During migration, everyone wore ceremonial attire. A woman wore the best boots, the most beautiful camisole. She put on a richly decorated headdress, kimishek. The Kazakhs divided migration into 2 types. The first migration, which we have already mentioned above, is a festive migration. But there was another type. It was called karali kosh, or mourning migration. It took place when someone died in the family and within a year since a person's death. When the whole caravan approached a village, its inhabitants came out to welcome and treat nomads with gifts. They were treated to milk, kumiz, meat. Children were given sweets and cheese. This custom is called gerulik. Another important point in the nomadic life was knowledge of astronomy, the movement of celestial objects. It was known that knowledge of the location and movement of such constellations and planets as Pole Star, Ursa Major, the Pleiades constellation, Venus brought many benefits. Those who, for example, knew the trajectory of Venus or the North Star simply could not get lost. The Kazakh people paid special attention to the study of astronomy and knew how to use it rationally. For example, judging by the movement of the constellation Ursa Major, people knew the system of celestial coordinates. For example, in ancient China, they wrote that nomads are savages, the worst enemies of culture. Europeans considered nomadic Huns to be savages and enemies of civilization. European scholars of the 18th, 19th centuries also spoke about nomads. Prominent philosopher Friedrich Hegel believed that despite the presence of nomadic social contradictions, they did not have statehood. But, excuse me, how many states were created by the nomads? However, this is how most of these sedentary peoples thought about the nomads until the 19th century. The nomads did not have a class society, only tribal community. Alexander Chelashnikov. In the 20th century, European scholars also had different points of view on the history and way of life of the nomads. However, they focused only on the negative aspects of nomadic life. For example, Polish scientist Ludwig Gumplowicz and British historian Joseph Toynbee came to the conclusion that nomads are not able to create civilization on their own. They learned the achievements of civilization only after conquering sedentary countries. The study of nomadic life began in the 20s and 40s during the Soviet era, while the works of Soviet historians were also dominated by the Marxist-Leninist approach. We gained independence and no one will ever call us wild. But when the whole world recognized the rich history and culture of our people, we suddenly began to call ourselves nomads. The question is, how do the Kazakhs themselves perceive this word? The word nomad comes from the classical Greek word nomos, which means tribe, division, nomadas, which means settler. A famous dictionary written by Noah Webster gives the explanation to the Greek word nomad as people without a permanent place of residence, wandering with their livestock. According to Vladimir Dahl, who compiled an explanatory dictionary of the Russian language, nomad means people without a home who with their livestock move from pasture to pasture. Sergei Ozhgov, who compiled another Russian dictionary, does not mention the word nomad in his works. He explained the word nomad as a person leading a nomadic lifestyle. The civilization of our ancestors can be roughly divided into semi-nomadic, semi-sedentary, and completely nomadic. In science, there are even concepts of vertical and horizontal migration. The nomadism itself arose in the 3rd, 4th centuries BC. We have moved from sedentary animal husbandry to regular migrations. So what is nomadic life? Since ancient times, Kazakhs have been wandering along with their cattle only across their territory. This was done solely in order to provide a sufficient amount of food for their animals. There are also other cases when people lead a nomadic lifestyle, but not for grazing livestock, but, for example, in search of a better life. This can be said about the gypsies. Their movements are chaotic, but the nomads move only across the lands that have been passed down to them by their ancestors. The idea of nomads was first formed among sedentary peoples. So where did this so-called nomadic culture come from? Many historians associate it with geographic cataclysms, but it would be a mistake to think so, because nomadic culture has a broader concept. I would like to ask you a question. Would a person go anywhere if he didn't have a horse? How would you answer it? Yes, this person would sooner or later adapt to certain natural and geographical conditions, undoubtedly. Consequently, the emergence and formation of a nomadic civilization was directly influenced by the domestication of horses. At the same time, nomadism allowed different tribes and groups to communicate with each other and explore the world together. In fact, a nomadic civilization is one of the earliest and most ancient civilizations on Earth, and there is no need to refer to it using with completely different terms. We should be proud that a nomadic culture has arisen in our homeland, in Kazakhstan. I am Akjol Taukan. Goodbye. See you soon. Watch us on Qazakh TV and leave comments.